Meet Anna. Anna is 38, lives in Munich, works as a project manager for a mid-size manufacturing company, and has spent the last 3 years feeling quietly optimistic about her finances for the first time in a long time. The worst of the post-Ukraine energy crisis was behind her. Her gas bill had come down. Her company had survived. She'd started putting money aside again. Life was stabilizing. Then, America went to war with Iran on February 28th. Anna didn't get a vote on that. Germany didn't either. No European country did. The war was launched by the United States and Israel, thousands of miles from the continent, over a dispute that European governments publicly described as dangerous and privately described as catastrophic timing. And yet, within 72 hours of the first strikes, the Dutch TTF Europe's benchmark natural gas price had jumped from 31.9 euros per megawatt hour to 54.3 euros. That's a 70% spike in 3 days. And it wasn't done moving. Because the dirty secret about Europe's energy situation is that when America decided to bomb Iran, it didn't just blow up Iranian infrastructure. It blew up Europe's entire energy strategy for 2026. Let me explain the mechanism because it's not obvious from the headlines. After Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, Europe went through its most severe energy crisis in 50 years. Natural gas prices shot up 180%. Household energy bills rose by more than a third. Germany, the continent's industrial engine, nearly deindustrialized. The ECB fought stagflation. Governments spent hundreds of billions propping up consumers who could no longer afford to heat their homes. And throughout all of it, European politicians made a solemn promise. Never again. We will diversify. We will replace Russian pipeline gas with cleaner, safer sources. We will build our own renewable capacity. We will never let a single volatile supplier hold us hostage again. So what did Europe do? It replaced Russian gas with Qatar LNG. It built the import terminals. It signed the contracts. It became deeply dependent on liquefied natural gas flowing through a terminal at Ras Laffan in Qatar, through the Persian Gulf, through the Strait of Hormuz, across the Indian Ocean, around the Cape of Good Hope, and up into European ports. And then on March 2nd, Iranian drones struck Ras Laffan. Qatar's LNG production capacity dropped 17% overnight, damage that engineers say could take 3 to 5 years to fully repair. The Strait of Hormuz, the 21-mile waterway that all of that gas and oil had to flow through to reach Europe, closed. And Europe, which had spent 4 years congratulating itself on reducing its Russian dependency, discovered it had simply swapped one geopolitical hostage situation for another one. Which brings us to the real problem: the calendar. Europe legally must refill its gas storage to 90% capacity by December. It started 2026, already well below where it needed to be. Just 46 billion cubic meters in storage at the end of February, compared to 60 billion the year before and 77 billion the year before that. Following a harsh winter, storage has since dropped below 30% capacity. To hit the December target, Europe needs to inject nearly 60 billion cubic meters of gas during the April to November refill season. That is a massive amount of gas that now has to be sourced in a global market where Qatari supply just got kneecapped by a drone strike, where every Asian buyer on Earth is bidding for the same scarce LNG cargoes, and where the Strait of Hormuz is only partially reopening under a fragile 2-week ceasefire. The Atlantic Council ran the math and put it plainly. Losing even 2 months of the refill season to a Qatari production halt means forfeiting roughly 25% of the injection window before a single replacement cargo arrives. And European buyers, unlike poorer emerging market importers who will simply get priced out of the market, will pay whatever it takes to secure supply. Because the alternative is not having enough gas to heat homes and power factories next winter, which is not a politically survivable outcome for any European government, but paying whatever it takes has its own consequences. Because the price of securing those LNG cargoes gets passed to industrial users, then to businesses, then to households. And Europe's industrial base, which never fully recovered from the 2022 shock, is already showing the strain. Chemical and steel manufacturers across the UK and EU have imposed surcharges of up to 30% to offset soaring electricity and feedstock costs. The ECB has cut its 2026 growth forecast for Germany to just 0.6% down, 0.6 percentage points from what was already a weak forecast. Germany's IFO Institute, one of the most respected economic research bodies in Europe, says Germany and the Netherlands are at high risk of recession. Italy is in the same conversation. The UK is staring down inflation predictions of 5%, the highest in Europe. European corporate distress has hit a 4-year high. 13.5% of European listed companies are under financial pressure, according to Alvarez and Marsal. The energy shock is described as acting like a distress multiplier, hitting leveraged manufacturers and retailers hardest, the ones who were already fragile and now face both rising costs and weakening consumer demand simultaneously. That is a dangerous combination, because when corporate distress reaches critical mass, it becomes unemployment. And unemployment is what turns an energy price shock into a full economic crisis. For Anna in Munich, all of this means something very concrete. Her company has already had to to pass energy cost increases on to clients. One major contract, a French automotive parts supplier, went silent after the latest price increase and hasn't come back. Her own energy bills at home are up significantly. The optimism she'd rebuilt over 3 years is evaporating, replaced by a feeling she thought she'd already survived. The grinding, exhausting uncertainty of not knowing whether things are about to get much worse. Here's what makes Europe's situation uniquely painful compared to America's. The US is the world's largest oil producer. It can absorb a global oil price shock with more cushion than almost any other economy. It still hurts gas prices, mortgage rates, consumer costs, but the US is somewhat insulated by its own domestic supply. Europe has no such cushion. It imports around 55% of its energy. It has no meaningful domestic oil production. It cannot pump its way out of this. Its only options are pay more, use less, or find alternative supply. And all three of those options have economic costs that ordinary households end up bearing. And the political trap sitting underneath all of this is the most uncomfortable part. When energy prices spike, European governments face enormous pressure to subsidize households. Spain already committed 5 billion euros. Portugal slashed fuel taxes. Germany capped petrol station price increases. Hungary froze fuel prices entirely. But the economists who lived through 2022 know that these subsidies, as well-intentioned as they are, tend to make the underlying problem worse. They reduce the incentive to conserve energy, which keeps demand elevated, which keeps prices high, which requires more subsidies, which blows out government deficits, which spooks bond markets, which pushes yields up, which is exactly what happened in 2022 when the UK gilt market briefly came apart. The ECB is already watching this feedback loop begin to form and is stuck in its own impossible position. Raise rates to fight energy inflation and crush an already fragile economy, or hold rates and let inflation entrench. The uncomfortable truth that nobody in European politics wants to say out loud is this: Europe got hit harder than America by the Iran war, not because of anything Europe did or chose, but because of a structural vulnerability that 4 years of promises and policy papers failed to address. The dependency moved from Russian pipelines to Qatari LNG. The choke point moved from a Ukrainian transit route to the Strait of Hormuz. The names changed. The fragility didn't. Norway figured this out after the 1973 oil shock. It built renewables. It insulated its homes. It made fossil fuel imports structurally unnecessary for most of its energy needs. Its household electricity prices are less than half what Germans pay. It is weathering the Iran war with comparative calm, while its neighbors write emergency legislation to stop petrol stations from raising prices more than once a day. The lesson is not new. It has been available for 50 years. And Europe, with its sophisticated institutions and its earnest politicians and its very expensive energy transition promises, keeps almost learning it before the next crisis arrives. Anna is still going to work every morning. Her company is still running, for now. But she's doing that thing again. The thing she did in 2022, where she checks the energy price headlines before she goes to sleep and tries to figure out whether she needs to start making different plans. And the answer, this week, is the same uncertain non-answer it was then. It depends on whether the ceasefire holds. It depends on whether the strait fully reopens. It depends on whether Qatar can reroute enough LNG through alternative channels. It depends on whether the summer refill season has enough time and enough supply to get Europe's storage to where it needs to be before October. And it depends on whether the next time America starts a war in the Middle East, Europe has finally, actually, structurally reduced its exposure enough that Anna doesn't have to check the energy headlines before bed. Which brings me to the question I want you to answer, because I genuinely don't know which way this goes, and I think anyone who tells you they do is either selling something or hasn't been paying attention. Drop your take below. A. Ceasefire holds. Strait fully reopens. Summer refill goes smoothly. Europe scrapes through. No recession. Anna keeps her job. The war was painful, but not existential. B. Ceasefire collapses. Oil respikes. LNG stays scarce. Germany tips into recession. And by October, Europe is staring down the same winter energy panic it swore it would never face again. C. Neither full crash nor full recovery. A slow, grinding year of elevated costs, corporate closures, household budget squeezes, and political turbulence where nobody declares a crisis, but everyone quietly lives inside one. I'll be reading all of them.